And so you're going to be seeing, I believe on CNN pretty soon here this weekend, a story of Garrett Anderson. Garrett Anderson is a young man from Carbondale who lost an arm. He was found by the federal VA region here in the Midwest to be 90% disabled. He had the disability for his arm. They gave him zero disability for the shrapnel because they said that the shrapnel that he carries around in his body were not due to his service. He was not given any disability rating for the portion of his skull that is missing or his brain injury.
Would you cover that shrapnel thing again? How did they arrive at that?
Nobody knows. He just got a letter, and it was his letter from the VA said that, he got 60% for his arm. He got, I don't know how many for some of the burns he suffered, some of the lacerations, shrapnel lacerations to his face. But the shrapnel that's in his body and the piece of his skull that is missing and the part of his brain that's missing were not service connected because the shrapnel was not from his service. But he did 90%. What that 10% does, though, is if he can be 100% disabled, his wife gets educational benefits. So since he's no longer able to work because he has this brain injury and he wants to stay home and take care of their child, she's now decided to go to law school because of the nightmare that they've been through. And if he's 100% disabled, her education gets paid for. But if he's 90% disabled, her education, she does not qualify for educational benefits. They have since appealed through Senator Durbin's office, who really pushed this through, and I think his case has been revised. But it took him over 2 years. Can you imagine the insult to have a letter from the VA that says that, yes, you lost your arm because of the blast, and that's service connected, but that shrapnel that you're carrying around, I think it's funny because I have shrapnel in my body that are obviously helicopter parts, and I always thought, okay, I'll just make sure that it says United States Army on the piece of shrapnel they pull out of me so I can prove that, no, really, it's from my service. But it gets to be ridiculous. But if he were in Texas, where they're much more generous. And it is a subjective analysis. If it's an actual physical amputation, you lose an arm above the elbow or below the elbow, those are actual cut, no pun intended, cut and dry percentages. But when it's something nebulous, like partial use of your arm or partial loss of memory or brain injury or something, that becomes subjective. And the fact is there's no consistency across the board, and the people in the VA that are doing this work are so overwhelmed and so overworked that these mistakes happen. It's not acceptable. It is shameful, and it needs to be changed. But those are the challenges facing the VA today. Those are also the challenges facing individual states, because if Garrett Anderson's rating had not been increased, the state of Illinois, he was going to come back to the state of Illinois to get his benefits, and we would be taking care of him. Just as if he wasn't married, if he ended up homeless, would come to us, because whether we like it or not, these veterans are going to access our social services, whether they do it under the label of a veterans program or whether they just do it because they're out there and they're in the need, they have the need. We're still going to be paying to take care of them. And I just really think that there is a need for better partnership between the federal and the state level. And right now it's all sort of one way. It's the state reaching out to the federal, and we don't really have as much of a relationship. It's getting better. We're reaching out and it's getting better, but it's a real challenge. So you can expect that some of that $700 billion cost of taking care of the 1.4 million veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, some of that cost is going to fall on each of our shoulders as taxpayers here in the state of Illinois. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and ask you, to open the floor up for questions. So I don't want to run too far over. And if you're interested in any of the programs that we have, I'd be more than happy to tell you about those in the state of Illinois. But I'd love to hear, your input on this, and especially since we have a senator here, if you would like to give us your perspective as well, that would be really, I think, valuable to the discussion. Thank you.
We have a microphone. We ask that you speak into the microphone when it comes around.
I don't really have a question. I just have a statement. that I'd like to make. You can look at enlistment and the draft as a citizen writing an open-ended check that goes up to and includes dying. And so the numbers that you have given us, what I'll tell you is they don't scare me. They make me angry, but they do not scare me. Mm-hmm. I am a veteran. I've managed to lead a productive life, and I'm happy to be here today. But I was so angry the other day when I read that 23% in this state, a quarter nationally, are homeless, are veterans. That is not acceptable. And Director, I don't care what the cost is. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. It's funny, if you talk to any veteran, whether they were drafted or they enlisted, especially in all volunteer military, the fact of the matter is a lot of promises are made to you. And one of the promises that's made to you is that we will take care of you for the rest of your life in exchange for your being willing to lay down your life for this country. Unfortunately, time and again in our nation's history, going back to the revolution, this country has not lived up to that promise. Quiet bunch? Can't be a shy bunch.
The one example that you gave about the determination of the 90% disability, and I don't mean to impugn the individuals that are stuck with making those kind of decisions, but what I'm hearing from you is that instead of that being a clinical decision, it becomes a budget-driven decision?
No, I don't know that I'll answer that question in two ways. I don't think that decision is a budget decision. That decision is a subjective decision of a civil service employee in the VA who sits in an office and has a stack this high of claims he or she has to look at. That person is not medically trained. So when I put in my claim for the VA and I gave them my disability rating from the military, I still had to go back into the VA and see a physician's assistant to prove that I really, amputations. They didn't accept. One of the finding of the Doe-Shalala report was that the VA is not accepting the finding of the DoD medical system. Your sister federal agencies, yet you don't accept each other's ratings. The note that I had from the surgeon who amputated my legs was not good enough for the federal VA. I actually had to go in and show and go through a whole another medical physical to show my disability. But that wasn't even where the decision was made. The notes from that physician's assistant were then put into a packet and sent off to the VA regional office, where there is this clerk who sits in an office and reviews a report and goes, okay, she's got two legs missing, that's this. But that partial use of the right arm, this is where the subjectivity came in. And I think I was given 15 or something, and my friend in Texas was given over 20. But that's where the subjectivity comes in. And the problem is that these civil servants are so overworked and so overwhelmed, and it takes 3 years. The VA has said it takes 3 years to train them up. Well, 3 years ago, they didn't start, or even 3 years before the war, they didn't start ramping up training these people. So they're so far behind that in any type of a subjective assessment, you're going to have those discrepancies. And it's just, and I can't even explain the whole, shrapnel is not service connected. I will say, though, that Garrett's award letter from the federal VA that found that the shrapnel in his body was not service connected, the clerk who put that in there cut out her name or his name and the signature so that individual person's signature is not on there. They were so ashamed that the decision that they didn't even send in.